Hello everyone, happy holidays, happy new year. This will be an informal Q&A session. I'll first start off by just a simple thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of everyone's support this year. It's really helped me out so much, not just financially, but as a support system. I've mentioned this here and there, but I've still been adjusting to this whole video making, online presence thing, and I probably will never get completely used to it, but having this kind of closer circle of people that I can count on and communicate with has really helped and made a huge difference. I'll first start off with an update. Let's see. Right now I'm in Toronto, as you can see. I know I said I was going to be away from the piano, but the truth is I have nowhere else to go. I don't feel like going anywhere else. But I'm here because I came here to record the Beethoven video. This is the only place that I have to just record in peace when I can, when the space is of course available, and make a video using an acoustic grand piano. So I moved to New York City half a year ago now in June, and that's right about when I started Patreon as well. And a lot of things were in transition back then, but I was never able to really settle there due to the piano situation. I hop from place to place when I'm there, but nothing has been really sustainable. So I find myself commuting over here to make that happen. So that is why you see me constantly going back and forth. And I know back then I expressed to you all in live streams that I was kind of veering away from what I really wanted to do musically, and I wanted to get closer to writing more and playing more. But the truth is I was in the thick of things with PBS Soundfield, and until that contract ends, I really wasn't in the position to manifest any of those desires for switching gears. So here I am 6 months later. I'm about to say similar things that I did 6 months ago, and that is why, because I scanned through the comments and there's some asking about this sort of thing. So without further ado, let's get into the comments. The questions. First one, what are your thoughts on online piano keyboard lessons for absolute beginners? I think there is a place for it, for sure. I hesitate to encourage and promote online lessons for full beginners, complete beginners though, because that is when we establish habits that actually stick with us for a very long time. And a lot of times when I'm teaching someone new, a big portion of it is trying to help them unravel certain habits that they've maintained for a long time since they began playing the piano. So that being said though, I do say that there is a place for it, because sometimes we're in a position in our lives where we don't have the time or the resources to make out and carve out that portion of our week where we find a local teacher to go to or have them come to us. So in that case, especially if you already have a foundation in music with another instrument, I do believe that certain comprehensive courses could be very useful. That being said, if you are relying on online sources, do keep in mind that a huge portion of how you progress with it will be up to you. You have a bigger responsibility in terms of trying to understand what it is you need and what it is you're struggling with, and trying to manage all of that on your own. Next question. The piano is an extraordinarily rich and flexible instrument, so much so that many musicians have compared the possibilities of a piano to those of an orchestra. However, it can't do everything. For instance, tones have intrinsically limited sustain, and portamento can only be vaguely approximated with a glissando. Within the time you've studied and practiced piano, have you wished that you could explore musical techniques that only exist with other instruments? Aside from the obvious, what sorts of things do you think piano misses out on technically and musically? That is a great question. Of course, sustain, portamento, that is a huge part of it, and things like vibrato and manipulating the sound once you've played it, that I envy about a lot of instruments, especially string instruments and the voice. I think at the end of the day, though, so many of the things that we do with our instruments is really to emulate the voice, which is our natural instrument. To answer the question, though, I will say that certain instruments, especially woodwind, brass, and string instruments, have the ability to bring in a note from a very, from an unnoticeable kind of non-present state and bring it in so gradually that all of a sudden you notice that it's there. And with the piano, I don't think that's possible because the moment that you play a note, however soft it is, it's already quite present. And I've always envied that aspect of those instruments. It has a lot to do with sustain, yes, but what I'm talking about is really the entry point. And exit, yes, you can. There are ways to do that with the piano, with, you know, the way you lift off and using the sustain pedal, but more so how you bring the note in. Next question, what habits did you have a hard time breaking? What good habits do you wish you got into sooner? Some bad habits, I used to shrug my shoulders a lot. Whenever something in the music got to a point where it's tense, I would physically tense up, and it took me a long time to reverse that. I'm still kind of working on it, to be honest. Also, some habits about listening. I don't think I always paid attention to sound quality. I would be so focused on pitch and the accuracy of pitch. I think because one of my weaknesses as a pianist was always memory and just playing things at the right time. I think that's common for a lot of people, actually. But that led to me listening to certain things, listening to my own playing in a particular way. Another thing is time. I think I had the habit of rushing all the time. And that is something that I'm also still working on. So, you know, this is a constant process. Let's see. Good habits. I really think something that made a huge difference was compartmentalizing my practice time and being organized with that. I wish I did that sooner because for the longest time, practicing or working on music was always just a vague kind of open slate. And there are a lot of pros to that because it opens up a lot of freedom in terms of what you feel like doing. But for someone like myself, sometimes I'm not so organized and I could easily forget about certain things that I meant to actually work on. And this is something that I touched up on a video called How I Log My Practice Time. So, aside from some endless pursuit of perfection, what's the most difficult part of learning a new piece for you? I think seeing the piece as a whole. Of course, when we're learning something new, we have to be pretty systematic about it. And the way that I approach it is to, start from the beginning and take it measure by measure, section by section, and then build from there. Sometimes, though, I end up focusing more on the beginning because after I get into it, I think it's natural to focus on the things that feel comfortable to us. So a lot of times I'll get stuck in the beginning portion of learning a piece because I know exactly how it goes and I'm comfortable. And to push beyond that, it takes a little more time. So I always feel like by the time that I know the piece as a whole, I know the beginning portion more than I do the end, and I know certain sections more than I do of the piece as a whole. So that's something I think would be something that's difficult. Next question, in what ways has practicing composition changed the way you interpret music for performance? When I first started playing and performing my own pieces, I struggled with it a lot because it was hard for me to switch gears from viewing that piece of music as something that I wrote that could be changed, even if there was improvisational elements involved. It was hard for me to just say, okay, now I need to let go of the part of me that came up with it and look at it as a solid piece of music as a pianist. Once I got more comfortable with that, which just took time, by the way, it really made me realize that there were a lot of things that I was picky about in terms of how the music flowed, how I wanted the music to sound like, that were not indicated in the score. And naturally, of course, all composers have a different way of notating things, but there's only so much you can notate with traditional music notation. So in reverse, now I think of, or I try to ask myself, what was the composer's intention here for the music? Even if I don't see something in the score, I try to push that further, and I try to be a little more picky and a little more specific about that. Were you ever quite excited to learn a particular piano piece, but while and after learning it, the piece lost its luster? What and why? I'll give you two answers. The first answer is any really challenging, technically challenging piece. And this is just a weakness of mine, I think. There are certain instances where I started learning a piece and then quickly realized, I don't have time to learn this right now. So the excitement just kind of dropped off. There are certain pieces by Messiaen, certain pieces by Liszt recently, and certain etudes by various composers, Ligeti, I can think of a few others. But I would just start it, but then the excitement wouldn't be able to hold my commitment to it as a pianist, if you know what I mean. Another piece would be Bach's Gold Variations, only because the few times, or the multiple times actually, that I tried to learn it, I never really kept up with it because I think I'm a little more fascinated by it as a composer. I'm fascinated by the way that it's been composed and how it's all put together, and I love studying the piece more than I do playing it. So I think maybe that's a good answer. That being said, that may change. Do you feel that the development of new compositional techniques has stagnated? What type of compositional techniques do you think will develop in the future? I do think that so many things have been done already at the piano or with the keyboard because the instrument has a very long history compared to some newer instruments. And a lot of things have been done. It's almost like you can do anything at the piano without getting stared at and shocking someone. So I do think it has stagnated, but I think there are things technically that can be combined with new ideas harmonically that have yet to been explored. Does that make grammatical sense? For example, there are things like counterpoint, different techniques that pianist composers like Liszt, Rachmaninoff, Chopin introduced into the piano repertoire, very elaborate piano work, passage work, that haven't yet been combined with certain harmonic elements, maybe in the jazz world or maybe in completely other genres from different parts of the world. I don't have specific examples in mind, but I do think that there are different combinations of technique versus harmony or technique together that haven't been explored. Okay, next question. Recent videos show your interest and effort to integrate different piano genres digested by a classical musician. What was your motivation to study or at least try to appreciate other kinds of music that are unfamiliar? I think, quite simply put, just curiosity. I've spent so many years focusing on classical piano repertoire that once I started to listen to other genres and just appreciate different aspects of different types of music, naturally, I just wanted to listen more and I wanted to learn more and I wanted to try these out myself in some way. Am I trying to transform myself so that I could completely learn a different genre? In most cases, no. It's really just, I think I use this analogy in the bebop video I put out where it's like taking a trip somewhere and immersing yourself into the culture. But that only goes so far. And I realized the potential negative aspects of that as well. Not negative, limitations. Because in really fully understanding a genre, you can't just dip in and out, which is what I've done for a lot of the genres that I cover in the videos, especially for sound field. But the way I view it right now is kind of like doing sightseeing and doing my homework in the best way that I can to just familiarize myself and broaden my perspective as a musician. And later on, I feel like this will transform in different ways. So speaking of sound field, here's one. What was a particularly interesting or inspiring moment for you on the sound field project this year? I'll have to say Nashville because I got a chance to interview Bela Fleck and his wife, Abigail Washburn, and that was incredible. Not a lot of the things that we talked about and a lot of things that he showed were not included in the episode because the episode was really about the banjo and the history of the banjo. But I learned a lot from him about his work process, and he showed me, how he writes music in Sibelius, how he keeps track of what he's written, how he records. He has a basement area that is just a fully functional and really interestingly laid out recording studio. And he talked a lot about different stages of creativity for him, which stuck out to me. He talked about going through periods of input and periods of output and recognizing that as being different, because a lot of times as musicians, we're pressuring ourselves to output a lot, but then we forget that we need to also take a lot in and listen and learn. And sometimes the two don't happen at the same time. Also, another thing was just to see him interacting with his wife and just them together in their environment. It really stood out to me because it was kind of like seeing something that I never thought could be true or could exist. Where, of course, you can never really know about other people's relationships or other people in general, just from an observer's point of view. But I really admired how they kind of struck a balance, a beautiful balance of both being musicians, both being active musicians, having that to share together, but they also had very different worlds that they both managed as musicians and as individuals. And they spoke to me about it, and I thought that was very, very cool. That stood out to me. Next question, have you considered doing live performances of your compositions? Yes, of course. I think that is something that's like a dream of mine. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm going for. That's my goal. Do I put it above what I do with teaching and with videos? No, it's a completely separate thing, but it's something that I haven't been able to really pour a lot of time, effort, and energy into. And it's something that I really want to do. And hopefully this is the year that I can finally organize myself to do that. I'm really still in a big transition, and there are a lot of things that are very uncertain for me, just like it was 6 months ago, but now even more so because I don't have this solid project that I'm tied to. And I realize that the structure of my life, my lifestyle, even where I'm planted, where I'm based, a lot of that is quite unstable. And for me, I think to really work on music and both write and bring these compositions up to performance level, I need time, I need space, and maybe I'm just being spoiled talking in this way, but I really feel like I need that. Maybe at some point in this year, I'll look for some type of residency. I know there are certain programs both in Canada and the US that offer that kind of environment, so it's something that I'll look into. But yes, of course. What is a recorded piece of music that you discovered recently that sparked joy? It's not something that I discovered, but maybe I rediscovered. I was listening to Maurizio Pollini playing Chopin ballades. Do I love Pollini's playing for all Chopin? Not necessarily, but for this particular ballad, first ballad, and maybe it didn't even have to do with his performance, but just the ballad itself. I actually never learned that piece, but I think it was on my way home after one of the last shoots for Soundfield. I listened to this piece, this recording, and I just started crying because it was so beautiful, and it just felt like an embrace to me. Just the music, the composition, the performance of it, and it was very powerful. And I think it just also reminded me that classical music is so beautiful, and that's kind of where I come from, and that's where my musical heart is still really planted. So that moment. 2 questions. In what ways did your experience while in university shape who you are today as an artist person in general? Number 2, how much did you practice daily while in uni, and were you ever afraid to go to a lesson because you were unprepared? Asking as someone who's currently working on their BM in composition. That is super cool, by the way. I hope your studies are going really well. To answer your first question, there are a lot of things that shaped who I am and how I am as a person that stem from university days. I think my work ethic really comes from there, as well as my, I guess, tendency to seek and take in criticism, whether it's from someone else or self-criticism. It's a huge part of the way I am as a person, not just with music, but just in life in general. And always seeking progress and improvement. Another thing that I want to add is how I work with people. And I'm not saying that I'm the best when it comes to working with everybody, but in general, I think I'm pretty easygoing and I can work around a lot of situations. I think that stems from university days because for a lot of projects, a lot of performances, I had to work with people that I wouldn't naturally be inclined to work with if it weren't for the circumstances. So I would say that. Okay, moving on to the second question there. How much did I practice? I practiced on average 4 to 7 hours while in my sophomore to senior year in university. I exclude freshman year because freshman year I slacked off a lot. I think I was adjusting to the environment and I had a very difficult time getting used to New York, getting used to Juilliard, and for those reasons, I don't think I was practicing that much. Were you ever afraid to go to a lesson because you were unprepared? All the time. All the time. I was always scared to go into my lessons because my teacher, Mati Recalio, amazing person, amazing musician, amazing teacher. He was very intimidating. And of course, as the years went on, I became more comfortable with him and everything. But especially before your senior year, he has this strict policy where, I don't know if he still upholds this, but he did, of whatever you bring into the lesson, it has to be memorized. And he really does not like revisiting a piece more than 2 times max. It was really about accumulating more repertoire. So let's move on to the next movement, new piece. And I always felt unprepared, and yeah, that was difficult. Best written source for proper technique, hand position, to learn what you would call micro adjustments while doing scales. This is a difficult question for me to answer because I did not learn technique from books, and I was never in a position where I was looking for books in this subject. That being said, if I were to try to look for information on this in book form, I might first start off with autobiographies or biographies of very famous pianists, and try to find information, anecdotal information about the way they approach their instrument. Other than that, Chopin as a pianist and teacher by Eigeldinger, there's a lot there about how Chopin approach the piano physically. This is going to be really long, I think. Okay, I'm taking way too much time on each question. Next question, mine's a little more cliche than others, but I'm genuinely interested. What's your favorite way to relax or unwind after a stressful day/decade? Self-care is more openly discussed these days, but still difficult to grasp, I think, at least in a concrete way that applies practically. That's a great question. When I was living with my dog, Bobby, I would go on long walks with him, and that was a really nice way to wind down and de-stress. But not having him around, I find myself not doing that really ever, which is a shame. Especially when it's winter, I find myself just holed up indoors. That being said, to be honest, one of my favorite ways to relax is to go to the market or to go to just some sort of general store, maybe even a pharmacy, and just walk around. So I'll be picking up, let's say, a box of Band-Aids and some water, and I'll just walk around, take my time. Or when I'm shopping for food, I'll just take my time and walk around the aisles kind of aimlessly, even though I know, exactly what I need to get. And that is just a nice way for me. I find it very comforting, and I've always found that comforting ever since I was living alone and in university, just strolling around stores. What is the album that you listen to or have listened to most in all of your life and in 2019? I think Glenn Gould's Goldberg Variations, both years, both recordings. It's just something that I always go back to, so that. In 2019, I listened to, maybe I can't pinpoint a specific album, but I listened to a lot of Tigran Hamasyan and Brad Meldau's After Bach, maybe. Who is your favorite pianist ever? Oh, these questions. Man, that is difficult. Favorite pianist ever? Frédéric Chopin. What is the most joyful music experience you had in 2019? I have two answers for this one. First, as a listener, I went and heard Yevgeny Kissin play in Toronto earlier in 2019, and that was one of my favorite concerts of the decade, maybe even. And I was just super blown away. It was just a great experience. As a pianist composer, there was a moment, I think it was after a month and a half or 2 months maybe, after I moved to New York, where because I didn't have a keyboard yet, I really wasn't able to play. And I spent such a minimal time on an instrument during that period that at the end of whatever I had to do there for that time period, the first chance I got to come to Toronto, I did, and I remember sitting in this exact room and playing the piano for a couple of hours, and it was just this massive release and relief, actually, a relief of just pent up tension in my body, and I would describe that as a very joyful experience. This next question is very difficult to answer. It says, without the fear of being a megalomaniac, what would be the 3 piano pieces in every genre and repertoire that are your ideals as a composer that I dream of being able to create music like? It's difficult to answer this in the exact form, 3 pieces in every genre. We'll have to sit here for days and I'll have to think about it. But just off the top of my head, some pieces that I look up to, I'll put it that way, might be Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings, Bach's Goldberg Variations, Liszt's Piano Sonata in B minor, Chopin's Preludes, his Etudes, and his music in general. But if I were to add a few more, maybe also his piano sonatas. Also Steve Reich's music for 18 musicians, Prokofiev's second and third piano concerti. This is too difficult. Yeah, this is too difficult. I'll just move on. What is your most intense art experience this year outside music? Something that sticks out to me is a particular evening in conversation I had with the gentleman that owns the place that I practice, one of the places I practice at in New York City. And he's always been a huge supporter of the arts, and that's why he opens his brownstone basically to a lot of young people, a lot of students, so that they can practice and rehearse there. But I've never really conversed with him to this extent about modern art. He collects paintings. If you go into the space, there are so many paintings and drawings all over, hung up. And I remember talking about different types of current artists, and going back home and looking up a lot of these artists that I didn't know yet. And that was quite an experience because it sparked a new type of curiosity in that field that I haven't felt in quite a while, to be honest. What do you wish for yourself next year? I wish for myself to settle a bit into a rhythm that is more in tune with what I want to do musically, and also space in terms of maybe trying again. I say again because my move to New York City has been great, and there's so many positives that came out from it. But as you can see, as you can tell in a lot of the videos, I'm constantly coming back here, or I'm going somewhere else to find a way to work and to practice and to play. So maybe organizing that situation, that is my priority. Okay, how are you? Cuckoo, thank you so much. I'm great. I hope you are as well. Next question, how is your income split? Like Patreon, YouTube ads, commissions. Are you all right financially? My income for this year is a giant question mark for the most part. But for this past year, the majority of my income came from PBS Soundfield, which was a significant amount for me, but maybe in relation to the amount of time spent and time and energy spent in the actual project, some may say that it's on the lower end, but I don't know. Let's see. YouTube ads, I don't rely on that much because it fluctuates too much. I don't upload that much. I think I uploaded an average of once a month, maybe a little more than that this past year. Commissions, not so much either. Yeah, for the time being. I have started some projects in film scoring and also just composition, but those are for the next year, so I have no idea. Other than that, a decent amount comes from selling scores and the course that I have, but those are really for a specific crowd that plays the piano or is really interested in seeing the score. So those are always in flux. But I'm doing just fine. I don't need much. I spend most of my money just on food and commuting, travel, whether it's coming back and forth between New York and Toronto, and then of course my rent. Yeah, that's pretty simple. I'd love to hear a bit about your dreams as a pianist. It's simple. I want to become a pianist that is playing my own works and promoting the works of other living composers. Those two kind of hand in hand. I really want to just help promote new music, and not necessarily new music that is categorically new music, but just music that is written by people that are living, that are part of this world and this human experience right now of this generation. Did you grow up in a musical family? Any musical or lack of musical influences and role models as a kid? How often are you rehearsing? As a kid, no, I didn't grow up in a musical family. My parents appreciate music, but they weren't avid listeners per se. My dad taught himself how to strum a few chords on the guitar. I think maybe that's why I love the guitar, but Neither of them are really involved in music in any way. Relatives, not really. At one point, my aunt taught beginner piano, but I've never heard her play the piano, so maybe that's saying something. And I think I always felt like I was on my own as a musician, as a piano player when I was young. So I think that's where maybe a sense of independence and self-generated curiosity comes from. But it wasn't until much later in life, I mean, until my teenage years where I found mentors and teachers that really guided me. And also, how often are you rehearsing? Practicing or rehearsing? Rehearsing with others. I don't rehearse. I'm not doing any projects that require that right now. Practicing, that fluctuates, but several hours a day, and I keep that posted on my practice notes page. Would you have any specific guiding words of advice to a guy like me, self-taught, like to experiment, understanding of notes and medium at music theory, but playing far too much within the same musical patterns at the risk of repeating myself to death? Okay, I can definitely relate to this. What I would say is maybe try, even if it's super artificial to do so, try to set aside a fixed time period with a very specific rubric or regimen, something out of your comfort zone, something that you're not used to musically, and make it a point to work on that project. I don't know, anything. Let's say you'll say, I'll take this month, and by the end of the month, I'll record these tracks in this specific genre, or in the style of this, or using these techniques, and just force yourself to do that and put a deadline on it so that you actually come through and come up with something that is tangible, even if it's like a digital file, but something that is a self-standing representation of that time period. So I don't know, that's kind of not very specific, but I think you know what I mean. Just give yourself a homework assignment with a deadline, basically. Any project on a more detailed how to sound like Chopin? Maybe, for sure. Something that I realized while making this how to sound like Beethoven video that I did recently was that there is a lot of benefit to break out of the format. And I was in a very specific format for the how to sound like videos for a long time. So moving forward, I'm sure when other composers' birthdays come around, or maybe not even, since I already did the birthday thing with Chopin, at some point, sure, of course, I'd love to do a more in-depth how to sound like Chopin. Is it possible to have a video on how to compose a fugue? Also, would like to know your day-to-day routine. Seems like 24 hours a day is not enough for you. Yeah, I think I covered the subject of a fugue very briefly in one of the older videos. But yes, I would definitely want to do a video on fugues. My daily routine, I wake up 8 or 9 a.m., sometimes earlier, sometimes later, but in general, I'll leave that morning portion up to different practical tasks that I need to do, whether it's emails, I need to send files to someone, that sort of thing, or memorize a script for sound field, whatever it is. And then I usually work from 1 to 6 o'clock. And depending on what is due or what I need to work on, I'll just focus on that. And during that time period, something that I started quite recently is to put a lock on my phone. I actually do that so that I'm not distracted. So I try to take calls and everything to do with the phone away from 1 to 6 p.m. And then afterwards, after dinner, I just edit. And certain time periods when I'm editing a specific video and I'm going all in, I'll just spend all day editing. But those are more specific. If you're starting from scratch, say you know how to spell chords and how basic chord movements, 5-1, etc. work, and you wanted to learn Bach, chorale, and counterpoint, how would you go about doing it? Books, self-teaching / teacher. I would definitely find a teacher. yeah, definitely a teacher. I wouldn't go about it with books because there's just so much information, and also that abundance of information is said in such a wordy way regarding music history and harmony, in my opinion, that I would go to a teacher who I can ask questions to, not necessarily someone that will know exactly what order to teach me in, but I would just have someone there. What's something about learning music you know now that you wish you'd known that would have saved you time? That you can learn so much about music in different circumstances and from different sources. I think for the longest time, I always viewed my primary piano teacher as the source. Whoever was my piano teacher would be, the one and only person that I looked to for advice and would listen to completely. But now I feel like you can learn so much from anything, whether it's a performance, a recording, something someone says about a certain aspect of music in passing, someone who's a non-musician who says something, and then in turn it applies to music. So maybe that. The more I work hard, the more I feel like there is really no silver bullet and my gains all come from massive amounts of time input. I then wonder if maybe I don't practice effectively and/or I'm just super slow. Any thoughts on that? Any ways to supercharge progress? Lately, I just accept that I need to practice constantly, and in 6 months or a year, I will be able to do new things, but probably not tomorrow. For something like this, I may recommend going to a master class or maybe a festival in the sense that, it's like a classical music festival. I know for other genres, festivals may mean just a series of concerts, but a lot of these smaller music festivals in the classical music world involve, lessons, performances with a specific group of people. Going to something like that where you're in a different environment completely with different musicians, different instructors, that may help. Next question, first and most important, how well did you sleep this past year and how well was your nutrition routine? Have you been healthy and vigorous most of the time? Very good question. No, for sure no, unfortunately. I kept up a pretty healthy sleep routine for about 2 months from June or so, and then quickly it just started to dwindle and get worse and worse. The thing with Soundfield was that towards the end, something happened with the production team where a lot of things had to change. Our schedules were completely messed up, and we had to cram a lot of shooting into a number of, 2 months basically. And during that time period, I really didn't sleep much. I remember some shoots in New York. I was just exhausted all the time. And when I'm exhausted, I usually eat more unhealthy, or I eat at very odd times, mixed with bad sleep. I remember I had really a lot of skin issues, and I always felt kind of bloated and inflamed, and I just wasn't healthy, and it took me a while to get out of that. But yeah, no, yeah. Could you find some chance to rest while also constantly trying to push limits by getting out of the comfort zone? Could I, personally? That's something I need to work on, but yeah, I definitely think you need to just strike a balance. What do you think about this quote by William Cowper in these respects? Absence of occupation is not rest. A mind quite vacant is a mind distressed. I agree with that. Sometimes if you're not doing something, that could be a lot more stressful, because in not doing something, you're dealing with the fact that you're not doing it, and that in turn causes you distress. So yeah, I totally relate to that. That being said, I think if you are able to force yourself to completely tune out everything, then I think you can have significant rest. And I think when that happens, might be sleep, or proper sleep. When you're really in deep sleep, you're not, maybe you're dreaming, but you're really not thinking of things that might occupy your mind otherwise. Do you think composing is always a form of improvisation as well? Not always. I don't think so. I think a lot of times improvisation and composition are sourced from the same type of creativity, but certain types of composition require a much more exact, deliberate approach that is not necessarily characteristic of improvisation. Has your taste, aesthetic in sound design and album recordings changed this past year? What's your favorite synthesizer sounds currently? Yes, definitely. I think I've become more in tune with sound production and the range of different sounds that can be produced in the different ways that you record something, and also with different types of synthesizers, different settings, different instruments in general. So yeah, I think I've really expanded that specific type of hearing this year. And what's my favorite synthesizer sounds currently? Maybe retro, kind of 8-bit, 16-bit, that type of sound still. I know I visited it in a video last year, or maybe the year before. This next question I'll summarize. It's basically asking my opinion on the thought of a composer as an architect, someone who dictates, how something should be precisely carried out, versus a gardener who plants seeds and sees them being carried out in a certain way. I think that's what it's asking. But I will say that I think it's more of the latter, more of a gardener, because at least for myself, when I'm composing, I don't really feel like I'm creating something, but I'm kind of gathering a certain type of sound or certain type of texture, along with a certain rhythm and a time flow. And those sounds are pre-existing, and these textures, whatever it is related to music, they're already in this world, and I'm just kind of arranging it in my own way. Next question, what do you think about this quote by Debussy? Works of art make rules, but rules do not make works of art. I agree for the most part. If you just think about music theory, harmony, all of that, a lot of the things that music theorists and musicologists talk about and lecture about, they really stem from pieces of music that were written, maybe, and I think most often without these rules in place. And over time, they've become rules and standards. That being said, though, I don't think necessarily that rules do not make works of art. I think in certain instances, you have to work with rules, and the lines really blur. So I'll just leave it at that, but I agree for the most part. Next question, when was the first time / moment you realized that you cannot live without music? Even in the case of facing adversities, what aspect about music has kept you resilient to this date? I feel like I can't live without music, just simply put. It's a huge part of my life, and just a huge part of my experience as a human stems from music and is attached to music. That being said, though, I can live without music. I'm not too romantic about that, and I feel like I'm lucky to be in a set of circumstances living in the time and place that I'm living currently, with the certain opportunities that were given to me by birth, by circumstance, that allow me to continue with music. But, survival first, right? Say that I'm not able to even put food in front of me and sustain myself that way, am I going to hang on to music? I'll say probably not. I'll probably put the very fundamental survival first. What motivates you most when waking up every day in order to continue working and pursue your brilliant exploration in music in the future? Thank you for that, by the way. What motivates me? I don't know. I just think that I have an opportunity to work on music, to work on things that I do, and why wouldn't I if I'm able to, right? So I think that's what motivates me. And even when I don't feel motivated, I quickly come out of it just thinking that, wow, I'm super lucky. Next one, I want to give serious props not just on the musical front, but also your video game is strong. Thank you. From the relatively straight ahead vids to the more edited / overlaid ones, always a pleasure to watch. Thank you very much. I saw in your bio a mention of a set of miniatures combined with video projections and was wondering if you have any other visual projects or collaborations with visual artists or musical gallery installations or any other such stuff that you are hoping to do more of. Yes, for sure. First of all, film scoring. Like I said before, I'm dabbling with that. I'm getting into it, so we'll see where that leads to. I've also been in touch with Zach Lieberman. He is a video projection artist who's going to use some of my improvisation. So there's that. And in the future, yes, especially when I'm in the place of putting together my own concert or my own performance, I really want to make video a part of that, or at least in some way for certain performances, yes. Another question, I'd love to hear your thoughts on just how widely a piece can be interpreted / played by different performers. For example, I've heard people play Chopin's Raindrop so differently in terms of overall energy and tempo. How far can you take a piece before critics will say you are playing it wrong? For certain critics, you just need to go a little stray a little away from what is widely accepted and immediately it's wrong. But for an open-minded critic or an open-minded audience, I think you can take it as far as you see fit. As long as it's coming from a place of authentic and just organic intention and interpretation of that piece in the way that you hear it and in the way that you see it. Certain instances where people do something different just because it's so different and you're wanting to be different, I think it turns into something else. But if you really feel and hear it a specific way, I think, you don't have very many limitations. I sometimes find it challenging to prioritize my musical interests. Many of us tend to amass our skills around the paradigm of one style, whether it be jazz, classical, or something else. For me, it's jazz. Do you have a way of thinking about and organizing a balance between your classical piano skills and other styles that interest you? Is it realistic to believe that I can somehow take an equally deep dive into more than one style without diluting my efforts? Are there universal fundamentals we can employ that make different things more similar? This is a very interesting question. I especially love that last bit there. Are there universal fundamentals we can employ that make different things more similar? I don't think I'm quite wise enough to answer that question specifically, but an example that comes to mind is the use of languages or learning languages. Say that your mother tongue is Korean and you learn English, kind of like myself, as well as other languages. You learn to communicate with different vocabulary, different grammar, but also you plug into a different culture when you're speaking a different language, and that you must learn in many different ways, and that takes time and it could be frustrating. But similarly, with music, say that you're rooted in classical, like myself, and you're learning jazz or other genres, sometimes it may feel like the fact that you're rooted in classical or something else or a different genre can hold you back, and that's the thing that is making learning something else difficult. But if you embrace it and use it as a reference, notice the similarities, notice the differences, I think it can all turn into a giant plus when you're learning a different style. That being said, what you ask about, is there a way to organize a balance? I think it's just a matter of organizing your time throughout the week. Just on a very practical level, in order to learn something, whatever it is, music or a different language, a different skill, you have to put in time. So the balance there is more about how much time can you consistently commit to something that is unfamiliar to you. So that's the best way that I can answer this, but that is a great question. All right, so I think that is it. I answered all the questions here so far. If there are more questions added to this post after I record this video, I'll include it in the next Q&A type video. It's now a couple hours before the new year. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope everyone enjoys the holidays, and I'm wishing you all the best for 2020, and I'm looking forward to all of the things that are to come in the new year. See you soon.